Welcome to the Church Safety Guys broadcast with hosts James McGarvey, Paul Buckner, and Mike Scully. Together, they make up the Church Safety Guys. Their mission? To equip, train, and disciple church safety teams. Join us for the next hour as we talk about all things church safety and security. Don't forget to like our Facebook page, join one of our church safety and security communities online, and share this broadcast with your church.
All right. Good evening and welcome to the Sunday evening broadcast of the Church Safety Guys. I am James and I am joined by my cohorts in crime, Paul and Mike. And you're
muted, Mike.
You're muted, Mike.
There we go. What's up, guys?
Okay. So we
New
can
microphone.
actually see Mike today, guys. This is an amazing accomplishment. Cue the applause, the applause in the background.
Exactly.
So, interesting or not, so we'll run through a couple of quick things. So if you're listening at a later time, please like and subscribe to the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and click that button down on the lower right-hand corner to subscribe to our channel. And as always, for more awesome, spectacular, and fantastic, I got to think of a couple more adjectives. Ways to describe our resources, visit our website at churchsafetyguys.com and reach out to us that way. We usually send out about every quarter. We usually send out an email of tips and tricks and different information for you and your church safety team. And so if you want to subscribe to that, we don't ever sell email addresses or put them out on eBay or anything like that. So yeah, sorry, Paul, although I will make an exception for your
awesome
email address so you can get spammed as much as you want.
Fantastic.
So interestingly enough, I wanted to do a quick segue. I'm gonna put the video recording of the service I went to today on the Facebook page for everybody to take a listen to and take a look at. And I thought it was really cool today because I went to church this morning and I had the opportunity to kind of shadow the main guest speaker that we had. And, thanks to my newfound certified EP skills from Matt Combs at Shield Force, I kept everybody at arm's length away from him. Yeah.
His poor wife.
But he came by himself. But what was really cool was, and the message really spoke to me. And one of the reasons was because the month of October, we're talking about missions. It's kind of our missions month. And so he was talking, and one of the things that he said really caught my attention, and it was this, that if you are passionate about the ministry that you're working in, you will be encouraged and you will do that ministry above and beyond anything else that happens or anything else that impacts you. And I started thinking about it, and it really kind of blew my mind, because I know a lot of times we talk about in church safety and security, having a team, motivating a team, staying positive. Not a week goes by where I think it was 2 or 3 days ago, I had someone reach out to me and say, I'm entirely burnt out. I can't do church safety anymore. I'm getting to the point of being depressed. Where can I go? What can I do? And so, because we deal a lot with that. To me, it was just a really cool message, because it was very encouraging to say, you know what, if God makes you passionate about something, then he's going to give you the strength to continue doing it, because there's a purpose and you have a purpose. And one of the big things that, they said today was, if you're still alive, God's not done with you yet. And, that's a little bit tongue in cheek, but at the same time, I was kind of like, you know what, that's pretty awesome, because I don't know, and I'm just being honest and transparent, I don't know of another ministry in or associated with churches that has such high up and downs. You know, one minute we go from intense adrenaline of trying to do the right thing to the next minute of just kind of standing around and maybe handing out a Band-Aid or doing something of that nature. So I just thought it was kind of interesting, and maybe it was one of those messages that I just needed to hear today, and you know, God made that happen, and it was a good thing. But I kind of felt like, you know, I will actually post a link to it and share it, because I feel like it would benefit others and encourage others as well. So tonight we're going to talk about MBTI, and we are actually going to talk about how that impacts church safety and teams and ministry as well. And I'm going to go ahead and bring my friend Jason Heavner in. He's with Wisdom and Knowledge, and we will talk about it. So he is the expert guru of all things MBTI. So
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us tonight, Jason. And we'll jump right in. I'm not sure where Paul went, but he'll be back. So why don't you go ahead and start for our listeners, go ahead and start off by just telling us a little bit of your background and how you kind of got into this as it, you know, relates to church stuff.
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks a lot for having me on. I appreciate what you guys are doing here in ministry. I started off actually as an electrician. I was homeschooled, and my graduating years, my dad said, "Hey, you got to get into the trades, because it's where you can make a good living." But after about 25 years in the trades, I was looking for something more satisfying or fulfilling, and along with that, so I tried photography and painting, and that didn't go so well, as you might expect, but I'm trying, you know. So, but then I got in through some church relationships, and then also seeing different family relationships falling apart or breaking apart. I really began to study personalities, and I don't know how exactly I really stumbled on it, but it was about 3 or 4 years ago anyway. And I really started to look into the structure of relationships, and I discovered a lot of helpful things that were helpful to me a few years ago, kind of explaining my issues, my hangups, and why I didn't always communicate well. And then I realized, boy, this is like a map of sorts to help navigate through relationships. And so now I've kind of moved from troubleshooting wiring and all that sort of thing to troubleshooting relationships and new installs, and I got a bunch of repairs, you know, all that kind of thing. But just putting it into a MBTI format. MBTI is sort of I would call like a name brand of personality. You know, like you got trampoline it's just a name brand, but we're talking about God's people, you know, and MBTI is trying to capitalize on it. But anyway, yeah.
Fun time. So for folks that don't know a lot about it, MBTI is kind of like the Kleenex name brand of, okay.
Yeah. And so, after about 3 or 4 years of studying, I was like, you know, I need to be certified. Otherwise people will just think it's an interesting hobby. But if I get certified, then it's actually a thing, you know? So, so I got certified in 2019 as a practitioner.
Nice.
Yeah.
So how does that, I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, understanding relationships. So what's the benefit, like in a church type setting, what's the benefit of understanding the folks that are around you?
Well, I'm sure everybody has had similar experiences, but sometimes it seems like people really desire to communicate well, mm-hmm. and still can't. And that's where I've really found it helpful. So, like in my own case, I've discovered that I'm like what they call intuitive dominant, which means it means way more to me what somebody means by what they're saying than what the actual words are. So if I say, "Hey, I love you," you know, what's actually behind the scenes going on is way more what I'm tuned into, way more than the actual words themselves. And so intuitive dominant people will kind of operate that way. And you can get misreads and I guess that's where it helps is to know how to expect to, when I go into a relationship. Well, I'll tell you, like my wife is S dominant, so she's sensory dominant. So it's not as good to be implicit is better than just kind of like having it. You see what I'm saying? Well, no, try to say it just the way you mean it, and that's helpful,
Cool. Awesome. So one of the things you had mentioned before when we were chatting was you have the chance to talk with some law enforcement, and kind of help them with some of their personalities and kind of understanding. How do you think, like if I did an interview, a lot of times like in church safety and security, when we bring people onto our team, we'll sit down and do an interview with them. And we'll say, okay, let's make sure that you mesh with the team. What do you think some simple things would be to look for in that interview? Yeah.
I sent you a picture. I don't know if it's able to throw it up or not. If you can't, it's no problem. But so let's see here. Everybody has all the ability to do all 8 functions, we call them. But some people find it. Yeah, there's one there. On the far right, we have all these functions. Do you have the second one like that? There's 2. Yeah, there we go. So this is what MBTI on the far right would say is there's SE, SI, NE, NI. But MBTI changes down to FE, FI. They call that all about feelings. And if you are going to listen to the Bible, then you got to say it's not about feelings, it's about values and what's good and bad. So when we're listen to a team, and you bring on a team member, you can see what's their strength, which particular functions are they really strong at. And it's like whatever they're really strong at, it's very likely that the opposite they're going to be very weak at. And so you can look at your team and say, well, if we're all, say, if you look at the top where it says knowledge, just say that everybody's intuitive dominant. Well, then that means that they're going to be by very nature that they're dominant intuition, they're going to have weak sensing. So you may want to pull on some, sensing dominant team players who it costs less energy to do the sensing. Does that make sense? Kind of. You have to know what the functions are, but once you understand the functions, I think you said perhaps you're an ENFJ, so we could look at under the logic there, we would see that TI is difficult, subjective, but what you're really high in is the values, objective values. So you could look for somebody who's perhaps either complementary or going to show you the blind spots. And obviously there's just a different level of maturity. So like I have my children, I'll actually go to some of my kids and say, hey, what do you think about this? Because I know that they've actually got some of my blind spots, and they're tracking really well with that. So I don't know if that helps or not.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. I'm not sure that I like being screened for my weaknesses and
yeah.
No,
so
I'm just kidding.
You sort of have to respect every one of the functions too. That's important because if you look at some as more useful than others, you're really going down a bad path. So you got to look at them all as equally important. It's almost like when the Bible talks about let the eye not to think that more highly of itself, and the foot, like all the functions are necessary, but there is this sense of, well, this function, because I use it easily, is more important.
Now, Jason, isn't it about balance in the sense that you're trying to read the other person potentially and come into balance in the likely way to communicate more effectively? So you may have certain personality style traits, you may have certain dominance in how you approach, but the person you're engaging or speaking to, like perhaps members of our teams, they may engage differently. So we, in a certain dominant trait, we may need to overcompensate in some areas to reach them more clearly, whereas others we may have to tone down. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah, that's well said. If somebody with SI dominant, they're really of the mind that history is bound to repeat itself. So let's look at the past and do what works really well. Whereas intuitive dominant people are like, the past is the past. It's never been here. Let's they're more apt to change and adapt. Both are relevant. You know, you have to be adaptable, but you also have to learn from the past. And so S dominant people really want to keep doing what worked from the past. And that's hard for intuitive dominant people to recognize and kind of appreciate, especially if they're, you know, strong in it.
So strengths and weaknesses really in each of those areas. You're going to have certain styles or approaches that are going to be strengths, but also areas that you may go weak in. So I think for those of us that are leaders of our team, it's good to understand not only where we fall, but where our team members fall, to know, okay, what is our likelihood of us coming across in our weak areas? What are we going to be perceived as, not just necessarily what we think we are?
Right. Yeah. That's well said. Yep.
Cool. So that's kind of one of the things I was thinking of from an aspect of conflict resolution. So that was kind of my next next thing. But, you know, in all honesty, how many times have we had folks running a team, and it's not just safety and security, it's any mystery, but how many times have you had folks in a church setting that were like, well, we've done this way for the last umpteen years. And that's another statement that we all hear often. Mm-hmm. And, you know, in a lot of cases with church safety and security, it's, well, we've never had a team before, so why change? Like, why do we need to move forward and embrace something different? So from a standpoint of application, understanding, even applying this and understanding what the church leadership is and where where they fall on that spectrum could be helpful to a team or to an individual that's trying to start a team but getting resistance.
Right. So in that one particular instance, you may be useful to cite some sort of time in history where security was needed, or some time maybe say, hey, there's been times when churches have needed security, and if you could cite those times, they might be more apt to say, okay, well, we'll repeat that. You know, that sounds like a good plan, versus it's just a helpful approach, rather than you should try this. So if it doesn't work, we'll stop, but you should try it. You know, it's kind of like going out into the unknown. But if you're saying it's worked in the past, in these instances, well, then you have something that they'll want to go on more likely.
They tend to crave stability if they're in that spot, and they're resistant to change. So you have to kind of influence, inspire, and override their resistance. So I think sometimes facts can do that, but sometimes it's just creating good vision, creating excitement and opportunity, and perhaps you could pull them from that resistance position.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Paul, did you have anything? You're kind of quiet, so I know you're unpacking stuff here. But
I am. To use Mike's phrase, I'm absorbing a lot because I have learned a lot about myself this afternoon, and so I'm becoming very introspective. But it's funny how God uses people for things, and I do chaplain work and I build relationships with people. So I was reading the results of it and going, you know, so it was kind of overwhelming. So I'm still kind of, I think, a little stunned by what I was reading about myself. And I've got this 174-page document to go through more about myself and making myself better. But it was just kind of an eye-opening thing for me to start realizing some of the traits that I have, even the negatives that I was like, I'm not sure I want my wife to see this, because she'd be like, but it's really interesting to me. One of my first contacts with this sort of typing was probably 3 years ago, and it was being used in a corporate environment by a very analytical type person who liked to mess with people's heads. So it really turned me off to it. Instead of it being something beneficial that I could learn from, it was super manipulative. And then, like, my second really strong contact with it, and I say this anecdotally, for anybody who's had a negative contact with anything like this, where somebody's weaponized it, you know, a manipulator's gotten a hold of it. Instead of trying to build up, they're using it to control you. I had contact with a lady. I was fixing her computer, and she started talking to me. I think James has heard this, but she started talking to me, and I could tell she was asking me leading questions. And I'm like, yeah, okay, she's going to pay me when this is over. I don't really care. And she was a retired psychologist, something like this. And so all of a sudden she just goes, cool. And she had satisfied her curiosity. And I stopped and I went, okay, obviously you were digging for something and you've come to a conclusion. And she's like, well, I'm sorry, I skipped a step there. She goes, what does your wife do? And I said, well, she's a nurse. And she goes, good. And that was it. And I went, help me out here. And she goes, oh, the warrior policeman personality should marry the nurse teacher. And I went, oh, well, cool. And that was it. And so I had some pretty negative contact with this early on, and then just anecdotal contact. And I'd heard some of the terminology, but I'd never dived into it. So for me, unlike Mike in particular, who seems to have at least a second-degree black belt in this stuff, to me, a lot of it is fairly new. So I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah, good to be careful going into it. It's made me nervous too. Who you talk to, it can so be weaponized. If you know somebody's weak points, sure, it's very. There's a verse, in Matthew it talks about. It says, the second greatest commandment, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Mm-hmm. If you're an extrovert and you love a good party and love a good outgoing, and so the Bible says, love thy neighbor as thyself, and you're working with an introvert, it's like, to me, it could also be one of the greatest acts of love is to study other people and how they're designed, rather than just saying, well, you should be like me, to kind of look at the structure of other people's thinking and really understand it. But totally agree with you. It can be weaponized.
But to build up, as you said, not to tear down. Exactly. Yeah.
And that's kind of an interesting thought too. And I'm going to circle back to the idea of building a team and picking people to serve with you, and trying to understand that. And I started noticing this on my team. There are individuals that I have asked to be in leadership because I see them as individuals that see where I can't see. Mm-hmm. So, and they hold me accountable. So the folks that, and some of our personalities cross over, obviously, we have likes, we have dislikes and that sort of thing. But there have been times when I've had a good friend of mine on my team. He'll come up to me and he'll say, hey, you were kind of harsh with that person. You need to step back for just a second. And, of course, me with my pride, my first reaction is, how dare you talk to, But then I realized, well, wait a second, there's a reason that he's in that role, and that God has blessed me with him being in that position and serving. And that's to communicate honestly with me, because I don't want to be doing something incorrectly and not having that support or not realizing it. So 9 times out of 10, when I have that individual that comes up to me, or I'll say to them, this is how I'm seeing this activity, this event, this situation. What are you seeing? Like, what do you perceive as this? Like, maybe I was just over the top being too offended, maybe it really hurt my feelings or whatever. But how do you see this? Was this person being rude, or was this person just being, themselves in that situation? And it's not adjusting. It's not saying that doesn't give me the right, like you said earlier, understanding your wife in that relationship. It doesn't give you the right to take advantage of that or walk all over that person because what their, what the positive and negative is. It's right. Hey, let's keep this in check and let's be a better team and let's work together better so that, we understand each other. So
in relationship to our marriage, I've noticed that, so my wife tends to be more skeptical of the future. And I'm more optimistic. So, but it's part of the design, and where before I understood personality, I would tend to be more like, as you grow and develop, this will go away. But it really doesn't go away. It's just part of the structure of the design. So instead of hoping that it gets developed, I just appreciate it. And so when that thing in the future that makes her concerned comes up, I can say, yep, that's a possibility. Like I can acknowledge that, and then we can say, but it's also possible that this good thing will happen, this other thing will happen. So let's not focus on that one because it's easy for me to handle. But there are personalities when they see the same thing, they're both going to tend to be pessimistic towards it.
Sure.
There's different attitudes that the functions kind of carry with them, pessimism and optimism. So.
Yeah, and that kind of made me think there's a few folks that go to our church, and I know Paul and Mike have heard this before, but there are a few folks that go to our church that have issues with dementia, and so a lot of times they do things that they don't realize they're doing. And so, there are team members like looking across the spectrum of our ministry. There are times when we'll respond or we'll be asked to move that person, maybe they interrupted a class or something like that. And so what's interesting to me is there are team members that are like, well, he's bothering them. We need to move him. And then there are individuals that walk up and are like, hey, buddy, come with me. Let's take a quick minute. Let's pray together. And it's not, and again, I'm not saying for those at my church that are listening, I'm not saying that's a problem. I'm just saying there's differences. So understanding who can respond better and who can more appropriately have that skill set to address that situation, really can be helpful. So make your team go out and everybody get tested, and then you'll know you'll be good to go.
Yeah. On that note, I like to remind people, be careful though, because it really needs to fit like a glove. Like if there's like you don't, because you can if you mistype somebody, you can put a lot of energy into treating them the way you think is helpful. So it's really important to really understand what you're saying when you kind of type somebody.
And I think you can have people be different in different situations. In other words, there's folks that get a little bit closer to the line, if you will, or they're not all eggs in one basket, if you will. And so I think in certain circumstances, you have people that can be introverts in some areas, extroverts in others. You can have intuitive in some areas, subjective in others. And so I think it depends on the situation. And I can find that the church security world requires us to kind of put on our hat, to step into a role, to operate a certain way. And I think there's folks that kind of step up into perhaps a personality that may not be their default.
Excellent,
so they stretch themselves somewhat. So it's good to be aware of not only what that is, but I think is looking at having a good balance in your team. Mm-hmm. So I know, like, for example, we've talked to John Riley. He's listening. We're going to need people who are good at balancing and listening and mediating and have that warmth to them because they can have empathy and they can talk to people. Yeah. We can't necessarily all have folks who are going to just be top-down drill sergeant style, let's execute, okay? And because that's not going to be helpful either. So I think it's helpful when we look at what are the skill sets, what are the personalities that we need on our teams, not just to fulfill the calling, the role that we need to do as ushers, as greeters, as people who are there to listen, observe. That's going to take certain personality types and not just necessarily those that may gravitate to a ministry called church security.
Well, and that's one thing John pointed out, because he is watching real quick, and then we'll jump to our sponsor break. But one of the things John commented was the chart can help determine if a person is not fit to be on the safety team. So maybe if they're not, and by fit, we're not talking about, physical fitness necessarily. Yeah. Paul, but from the standpoint of if those categories don't mesh up well for that ministry, and being able to adapt or be flexible or that sort of thing, that can definitely be a good good indicator that, you know what, maybe that person is better suited in another ministry within the church. So,
Yeah.
all right. So what we'll do, we'll go to a quick break. We'll take a quick break here and thank our sponsors. And when we come back, we actually, Jason actually sent me a chart. So we'll take a look at that and kind of review some of that a little bit more. So stay with us and we'll be right back with you.
With over 50 years of experience with religious and nonprofit organizations, Thomas Alexander Insurance and Associates understands that your congregation is different from a traditional business. We're here to fulfill your needs, coming to you while creating a personal plan for your budget and size. From your local community to around the globe, we are advocates for you. Thomas Alexander Insurance and Associates, your partner in service.
There are many churches around the country that understand why church security is important, but they are having a hard time understanding how to do it well. Our national 2-day seminar takes the security of the church from the why to the how. Friday night kicks the seminar off with a lot of core topics covered to include verbal de-escalation and conflict resolution. We can't ever forget that the church is here for the hurting and the broken, that we want the hurting and the broken to be in our church each week. Balancing security with a welcoming heart is something that takes intentionality to be able to do both well. In today's society, people are walking through the doors of our churches expecting that everyone that is working in some capacity is capable of handling any security issue that may arise. If we are representing our churches with our service, then we all need to be standing on the wall securing the ministry of our church so that the work of God is able to be done in the hearts of everyone coming through the doors. We would love to see you at one of our seminars in the near future, or be willing to host one in your community. For more information or to register, visit our website at cv-ministries.com. We hope to see you soon.
The Church Safety Guys is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping equip, train, and disciple church safety and security teams. We are about all things church safety and security, which starts with a ministry mindset and a servant's heart. We are protectors, guardians, ambassadors, and shepherds. We help church and place of worship safety and security teams all over the United States through our broadcasts, online communities, conferences, trainings, resources, and products. Help us reach more churches in impactful ways by considering becoming a monthly ministry partner. $2, $5, $20 a month will help us continue to provide these resources.
Okay, so we are the Church Safety Guys, and we're back with our special guest for this evening, Jason Heavner from Wisdom and Knowledge. And real quick before we jump back into it, I just want to mention that for those of you that are listening in the Central Ohio area, October 23rd, Dan Blevins from CV Ministries is actually going to be doing a 2-day training seminar in Dayton, Ohio. And so fantastic opportunity, very, very minimal cost. I think it's like $40 for the 2 days. And so very, very well-balanced class. So if you have any interest in that, definitely check out his website. You can get tickets for it. They're still trying to fill up that church venue. But Dan does a fantastic job. He's been on the show before. He does a podcast about church safety. And so I think the last time I checked, he had like 8 or 10 people signed up. So if you're in the area and you have free time, definitely you want to want to check that out. So if you're listening on a podcast at a later time, feel free to like and subscribe to our podcasts, or if you're on YouTube, go ahead and click that like and subscribe button on the lower right-hand corner. And that actually helps us out a lot, because it allows us to see who all's watching and the impact that we can, Lord willing, make to churches around the U.S. And so we're talking about MBTI and how that impacts, or how it could impact, any ministry in your church, but specifically church safety and security. So I am going to throw it over to Paul. You said you had a comment.
Yeah, some of you guys heard me talking. I was messaging you guys the other day about Mark Gungor, who has a series of seminars called Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage. I can't recommend it highly enough. Good stuff. But he talked about being like improperly profiled for years in ministries that he was involved in, because he's extremely extroverted and he uses humor to teach, and he is exceptional at it. So I'm sure if he was profiled, he would be like way on the extreme of the extrovert. But he talked about how people would always say to him, it's not about you, and don't be looking for glory, and don't be looking for these things. And he's like, I just enjoy being in front of people, and I'm super friendly. And I can identify with that as someone who is firmly an extrovert, that being mistyped and having people misunderstand you. And it's funny to me, like classrooms were a nightmare for me as a kid, because you got people that were in a classroom that learned a certain way, that wanted to sit a certain way and all face a certain direction and not move for 30 minutes or 4 hours or whatever, was an incredibly difficult thing for me. And I've discovered over time that I'm a kinetic learner. I learn best when I'm moving. And I learn constantly. And so as I was sitting here, a lot of this is, like I said, is new to me. And I've printed off a lot of material to read through. But I was sitting there identifying these things about myself going, well, that makes a lot of sense, because I've discovered several of them over time. And it's funny when people try to incorrectly, improperly force us through a particular mold, and we balk or it doesn't fit, you end up with class clowns and people acting out. Or you end up with burnout in ministries and people that don't want to do them. And, to you guys' point, maybe there's somebody who's not an extrovert that doesn't enjoy interfacing with people, that would love to do tear down after a service, would love to do setup before a service, those kinds of things where they can serve and feel fulfilled. I mean, I have friends that they want to serve in the parking lot because they can do this as cars go by. That is the amount of contact they want with people that they don't know. That's basically what they want. And so I thought that might be an interesting commentary on what you were talking about, to help find the right fits for people in ministry.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's exactly right. Because to Mike's point too, I forgot how he said it exactly, but sometimes you have to step up. Like sometimes you have to get out of your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. Just so the idea with this is just simply, how can we set up people so that it's the least cost of energy? We're trying to do the most efficient, but it's not always going to work. You have a little small church, you're going to have people doing stuff that they're not good at. But the idea is, if you have the people, put them in the right places so that the cost is not a great expense to them, but they can kind of flow with it. That's kind of the goal.
Well, and you certainly, when I've been involved with different ministries in our church, whether it's a conference or something like that, what's funny to me is sometimes it can be frustrating, right? Because if you're working with somebody else that has a different mindset with that ministry, if I'm going out of town, for example, and I'm going to go do a conference, I like to pack stuff that I would never even think about needing, but just in case something comes up, I want to be the guy that has quiet, Mike. I want to be the guy that always has the flashlight, that always has the toolbox, that always has all that stuff just in case. So, and a lot of times it's hard for people to understand that, but it's also hard for me to understand, working with folks, how short vision they are. And it's not intentional. I don't mean that as a negative thing, but a couple of weeks ago, and we'll be talking about this next week, but last week, Mike and I had the chance to go to Missouri to take a class together. And I knew that Mike was flying in. I was picking him up at the airport and we were driving down there. And so my mind went in overload at that point. I've got to not only pack stuff for me, but Mike, there's stuff that we needed that Mike couldn't bring on a plane. So then I'm like, well, I got to pack this for him. And then, and then I started thinking, well, wait a second, what if he doesn't like this and this setup? So now I got to bring this setup. So we were actually doing an executive protection class, and so our instructor had said, bring some firearms, bring different things like that. And so, moving forward, I'm like, well, maybe Mike will like this, but maybe, so I brought this whole mess of stuff, and
it was great. I'll comment and say, it was great to have choice. I think for the rest of us that fly across the country that are not necessarily sworn officers and don't want to very easily bring a firearm with you, it's a much different scenario. So I was going to drive. I was going to be like, okay, great, I could drive across. I have my Utah license. I'm covered in all the states. I'm good. And then all of a sudden, nope, you're going to fly in. And so that was a lot different. But I will say, despite all of the ragging I get from these two, I did actually enjoy carrying the Glock all weekend. Yes, I did. Yeah. I'm sorry, Smith and Wesson.
Oh my goodness! All right, so Jason, I'm gonna jump back into this because Paul is gonna fall out of his chair and die from that comment. Hey, all I'm gonna say, I'll just say this. It was a 40, so I was able to supply that for Mike, and he was very grateful. So he wasn't like, why is this a 40 and not a 9, Paul? So
perfect. What can I tell you?
One of the things you sent, Jason, and I'll pull it up, was the large chart of different. We'll try and stay on topic, although sometimes it's challenging.
I'll make it not a disqualifier, but a note to that. The MBTI, I'll just say, won't arrange the chart quite this way. So this is a different arrangement that I'm using. A guy who I can't really recommend long term, not long term. C.S. Joseph kind of did the arrangement to this chart. I respect some of his system, although I don't respect some. I don't know. It gets complicated. I like his chart. I like his methodology. I'll say that much.
Well, and real quick before we jump into it, one of the reasons, for those of you that are listening, one of the reasons that I liked the idea of bringing Jason in is because Jason and I kind of grew up together, but he also looks at this from a biblical standpoint. And so when you apply this through a biblical standpoint, I know a lot of times philosophy-wise, it changes a little bit different, or it's a little bit different, because I think, unless I'm mistaken, I don't think MBTI has that biblical influence.
Correct. Not at all.
Okay.
In particular, with the F function, we'll see, like if you look at the blue, we'll take the blue for instance.
Sure.
You see any one of these is an FI or an FE. They're going to call that feelings, and they're going to say you're going to make judgments based on your feelings, and that's just it's kind of it's sidestepping the real issue. You're going to make decisions based on your values, and so I strongly replace the F function for feelings into values, because where do your values lie? And everybody has a way that they set up their values, and I would recommend setting it up through the Bible and God's values. But right, where's my hand? I can see.
Right.
I'll bring it back.
Yeah. But remember we were talking too. There's we can move between, according to the MBTI doesn't talk about this as much, but I believe it too. We can move between our what comes easiest to us to also move into places like our conscience. So like let's take the ENFJ for instance. The ENFJ, they have a flow of thought, but they can stop their flow of thought and think, but now what's the opposite? And they can move to a different kind of personality type. And the idea is, like, it'd be nice to not have to constantly do your job in your conscience thinking, okay, but rather than than that. Just do what's in your main flow. And you can aspire, but when you aspire to another personality type, you really have to have a low risk situation. You don't want to be under pressure when you aspire. It's kind of needs to be kind of easy. But you kind of move within this quadra of 4 different personality types, so that you can be extroverted, but you're going to kind of go extroverted in a certain way, or introverted in a certain way. So.
Cool. Alrighty. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of circle back on in my notes, and if you're listening and or watching and you have any questions, please feel free to post them, and we'll do our best to try and get to them tonight. But Jason, to your point, one of the things you mentioned earlier, you said that you can really hurt people if you mistype them or if you put them in the wrong category for that. How would we do that, and how would we mistype somebody, and then how would we make sure that we don't do that, I guess?
It's a good question. Part of it is a study. Taxonomy is like the study of what we're trying to do is objectively speak about people without like gossiping. So you say like, so and so is this type, and so you're trying to do that as a benefit. So like a dog and a cat, 4 legs, tail, ears, eyes. There's so much they have in similar, except one can climb a tree. So if you think you've typed somebody right, so let's say and you think they can perform this function, and you're really kind of convinced of it, and then you go have them perform that function, and they do poorly at it. You're kind of saying, now, is it because they're being obstinate? Well, we still have a sin nature, right? We still we have, this doesn't fix things, and that's one thing to watch out for when you go on YouTube and watch out, is that this is a religion to some people. Like, oh, if we understand people, then we can get through all this, and that's not the case. This value system is corrupted. But when you mistype people, so I would say, so far as like, even my children, having typed them, I would like to see them marry spouses that aren't going to be high-cost relationships, sure, where they're not going to have to spend a lot of years, right, learning about each other, where they can kind of get into a flow more readily. Everybody can use this. If you marry somebody who's a difficult personality type that's compatible, a benefit of this is that you can actually begin to understand why the conflict is there and actually work through it. But even better yet, why not marry somebody if the option's there, or put a team member in if the option's there that's going to be a high compatibility. So hurting people can be expecting something of them that they are really not set up to do. And then you can also just do it to be mean. Their weak points, then you can exploit that, which is obviously very bad.
2 thoughts there. I think to that is, you can sometimes encounter people that are unwilling versus unable. Yeah. And those that are unable are teachable, and you can spend the time as leaders to teach them what's necessary. Those that are unwilling perhaps are just pushing against the grain, or we may be encountering folks that may just have had training from a different side of the fence, if you will. Not everybody who's necessarily trained in or has a background in military or law enforcement is yoked well necessarily for security. They can be, and right, many are. And so it's not that all are great or all are bad. It's that their training may put them into a perspective of how they would serve, okay, because of how they've been trained. So I think it's a matter of that bucketizing, if you will, or casting, or classifying your team member in a certain way. You don't want to put them in the wrong bucket.
Right.
Yeah. And that makes, to me, and I'm still trying to unpack this myself. I'm going to go and have my entire family take this test now because I honestly, the idea of having my kids do it never even crossed my mind, but to better understand them, that makes a ton of sense. But the idea of what you were saying, Mike, to transfer law enforcement over to safety, we see that a lot, where somebody is like, hey, and I think John mentioned it before, and he had to jet, but Veterans, that's another thing. If a veteran exhibits any PTSD or any different things like that could impact his ministry, that could impact it, in a different way, an unexpected way, not necessarily a bad way, but a lot of times in church safety and security, we see law enforcement and veterans being just shoved into the ministry, and it's like voluntold, here, you have that background, you would be perfect in this.
Yeah.
When in reality, if you look at the category of person that actually has the leadership background or has that personality, I almost would say that person could lead more effectively because they can understand the broad picture versus just the tiny, this is how we do it in law enforcement, so this is how we're going to do it. And the spectrum of applying that to a church situation in a lot of cases is different, because we're not necessarily handcuffing people and reading them their rights in the church sanctuary. I mean, sometimes we do, but Paul, you were going to say something. I'll throw it to you.
That really resonated with me, though, because a lot of times when I'm working in an environment and I'm doing church security or executive protection or something, what will happen is I will find that within the group, people figure out really quick that I enjoy people, and they start sending me up to deal with situations. And they're like, I got your back. I'll thump them if they need it or whatever. And a lot of folks in the law enforcement world, that with the training and a lot of the personalities that are attracted to it, and it isn't a bad thing, but you will find folks that they're like, handcuff it or trespass it. That's just where they're at. And there's really nothing in between. And that doesn't really work well in an environment that's all inclusive and welcoming. And I actually had a deputy today ask me at the door, he goes, so if this happens, how do you want me to handle it? Or do you want me to handle it all? Do you want to go up and handle it? And I said, I would much rather that you cover me, and I'll go up and talk to the person if this or this happens. And so there are definitely different personalities that are good with things. And some people just do not have the personality for it. And I think it comes down to almost like putting the right weapon in the right person's hands.
Yeah.
If somebody has some of those skill sets, like what you're talking about, and you know how to type them and go, you're good for this. Well, then we get them to John Lee O'Reilly, and we get them the de-escalation skills. And we've taken a guy who's got a natural eye for accuracy and given him the right weapon. I don't know.
Yeah.
For my brain.
Like a sniper rifle versus a handgun. I don't know guns, guys, but like if you're going to clear a room with a sniper rifle, it doesn't sound like a good idea, but it's very effective in its place. And it's
like
kind of
that.
what I'm looking at. That's how I'm looking at personalities. It's like let's try to use the right design.
I like that.
So, is there a case for Glock versus Smith & Wesson here? I'm asking for a friend.
I'm staying out of this one.
Wise man, wise
You're
choice.
breaking up.
Yeah, I can't hear you. Your internet connection's bad. So I really appreciate you joining us, Jason. We're kind of running out of time, so wrapping things up real quick. Where is, if somebody was interested in getting typed, I know you and your wife work on it together, but how would they go about getting a hold of you or getting connected with you?
Yeah, pretty much through Facebook. I'm kind of trying to use that medium right now for all my contacts. So if you can check it out on Facebook, maybe we could put a link in the description or something like that of
I can do
where
that.
it is.
I'll throw that up.
I'd be flattered if you want to watch some of my podcasts. It's just me and there's no other people on it, but I'm just, not podcast, but just kind of a broadcast. That's the word. And I'm just talking about personality, just trying to just give people ideas of how to use it and in different areas. Yeah. So love to see you guys there.
Cool. So definitely, if you have more questions, I'll post his Facebook link down in the comments there. But if you have questions or are interested in getting typed and helped with that, Jason does a great job with that. And I went through some of the videos, and I need to go back through and watch them, but they are really helpful. So for those of you that are, maybe you don't completely understand the biblical aspect of this, or maybe MBTI and the concept of different personalities is different. If you go to his website and you check it out, or his Facebook link, there's some great videos on there, and that gives you some pretty systematic ways of understanding and trying to figure out, okay, this is how this works, and that sort of thing. So
perhaps hopefully with the lens of our God, because the MBTI does not see it. It's not about feelings. We've got values, and where do they come from? So.
Well, and I love the idea. One of the videos that you did originally that I watched, you kind of expounded on that, and that was one of the things that I really appreciated, like having the biblical aspect again of just saying, okay, so what's the difference between values and and morals, and understanding that, okay, as a believer, or as a Christian, I'm going to run my values through God's word, makes a ton of difference. And someone that doesn't have those values, it doesn't mean that you can't use this and understand them better, but it does kind of put it in a different,
you get a different output. Yeah.
So I am going to turn it over to Paul, and he can pray us out and wrap stuff up, and we'll go from there.
Jason, I really have enjoyed this. I'm in a very introspective mindset. Anybody who's watched me on videos knows I'm usually a bit more chatty, and I'm kind of like in neutral in my brain, kind of thinking through what all we've talked about tonight. But when I went through Mark Gungor's Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage, they did some of this and some very basic things. Obviously, there's love languages, and that's part of how we think. And if we understand our spouse's love language, or our friends and our coworkers, our family, whatever, if we understand their love language, well, this is one more tool, because God created us with psychological profiles. He made us the way he did. And I don't go as far as some of the Freudian stuff that I think is truly lost, and it's part of a very broken world. But for someone who's probably sitting here going, I don't know what I think, God created us within a certain set of guidelines and how we operate. And if we can understand what those are, we can be a whole lot happier. And probably a decade ago, my wife and I went through that and began to understand, I'm, ADD and full of energy and very creative, and that means I have these certain types of personality traits. And she just kind of turned and looked at me as he was talking about those, like, whoa, that's you in a nutshell. And I was able to do the same thing with her. And we realized, not only are there things that are endemic to the way God made men and women differently, we might as well be two separate species, but then there are traits that cross-pollinate, and maybe there's a trait that typically is a male trait that here's a woman exhibiting.
Yes,
and
totally.
Yeah. And it's wild. Like, he talks about the nothing box, where men go and they fish, or they hunt, or they watch TV, and they mindlessly flip the channels. And sometimes you got a lady that they like to do that. And when you can understand what those things are and better understand the other person, it's not that they're broken, it's that they're different than you. Yeah. And I think that was the biggest takeaway, by the grace of God, that we came away from. We weren't like, oh, and I think what we were trying to do was like go, well, obviously you think like I do, so what's wrong with you? No, you don't think like I do. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with you. You're just different. And I think that was one of the most powerful things. We both came away going, whoa. And we actually rewatched that Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage conference. We bought it on DVD. We rewatch it every year. And so I'm actually really intrigued, because I think this is going to help me get another aspect, add another facet to what I understand about this. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Mike, would you like to close us in prayer, brother?
Sure. One last comment I think is fitting to this is that so often we talked about the buckets, we talked about typecasting. Well, think about society and how they often will cast us aside and discard us because they view us as having some slight imperfection. And that can be personality driven. And yet they're so willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will, because of that perception. And yet when we look at it and you say, okay, Christ died for us despite of our sins. And so he didn't cast us aside. He cast aside all of his human concerns so that he could die for us. So I think if I recall, I think it's Romans 5, I think it is, that is that story. But we're flawed. And I think overall, despite our imperfections, God still wants to do what he can for us. And I think that's the amazing thing. So I'll close this out. Lord God, thank you for this opportunity to gather together tonight to talk about your creation, Lord God, what you have done in each of us, the personalities that you've sown into us where we're made in your image, God. We ask you to acknowledge the fact that, you know what, we know we're not perfect, Lord, but we don't want to be hypocritical. We don't have it all together. Open our hearts, Lord God, to be accepted of others, to understand others in a way that we can't always do easily, Lord God. But we need to lighten our hearts, if you will, and learn to accept others in different ways, Lord God, so that they might know you and know what you did for us, Lord Jesus. In your name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right, so I will. I'll go ahead and cue the exit. But again, thanks for joining us, Jason, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future. So,
All right. Thanks a lot.
Until next time, guys, take care. Feel free to visit us at our website, churchsafetyguys.com, for additional resources. Have a great week. Next week, we will actually be on same time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll be talking about the class and one of our new sponsors, the class that Mike and I did together, and Paul showed up to harass us at, and then we'll actually be answering a few questions. So if you guys have any questions during the week you're listening to this and it's church safety related, feel free to shoot us an email, and we'll have a small segment for questions in regards to church safety and security. So we'll try and answer those and get the answer out for you. And that's pretty much it. So until next week, take care. God bless.
Thank you for joining the Church Safety Guys broadcast. We hope that you found it informative, and we appreciate your feedback. Looking for ways you can help us reach more churches? Share our broadcast with your teams. Consider becoming a monthly ministry partner. Like and share our page and join the discussion in our Facebook groups. Visit our website at churchsafetyguys.com for other great resources. Remember to keep a servant's heart, a mindset of ministry, and Semper Disciplina. Always be training. Have a blessed week.